Let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. We're live. Welcome to the Gamification Revolution. I'm Gabe Zichermann coming to you from an unusually sunny but very cold New York City in January, and I'm here with Asi Burak, the co-president of Games for Change. Hi, Asi.
Hi, Gabe.
Thanks for being here with us. And before we get started, for those of you who are interested in gamification and Games for Change, G Summit, which is Gamification Summit, coming up in April. And you can register for Gamification Summit at gsummit.com and see Asi speaking there, which will be awesome, along with a bunch of other people. It's a lot of fun. There's some information down below, as well as how to ask a question. And we encourage you to ask questions. We'd love to get them answered. So, Asi, tell me this, which is so very important. What is a game for change?
So, I think that the Game for Change is a game that has a purpose that is beyond entertainment. And I would say that the overall purpose is social good. And social good could go in many directions. You could speak about human rights, and you can speak about climate change, poverty, women equality, but it could be, very daily mundane things like public health or, real world events around us or gun control. To me, it's a very broad definition, but it needs to have this kind of core of you want to make the world a better place by saying something, by promoting something, by energizing people to take action.
So it's funny that you brought up gun control because this past week saw probably one of the most controversial things that's come up in the kind of, in this space, which is the NRA after the shootings at Newtown, after saying games are the cause of violence, releases a game that is intended to help you, I guess, to encourage people to work with the NRA and to encourage gun use and gun ownership, which from their perspective, I guess, is a social good in the way they view the world. How do you
Right.
feel about that kind of stuff? And how and can that be part of this equation? Can that kind of stuff be part of the equation?
I mean, it's interesting because I have this debate a lot with the indie community, and even the event in Australia that you were part of. So there were some in the indie community in Australia, in Games for Change Australia, that criticized the event that it didn't have a change agenda. So they were expecting to see a very extreme liberal agenda, against corporations. And why do we bring all those gamification corporations to speak? I see it very differently, and I think that if the NRA is authentic in making a game that they think is going to change perspective and going to present their point of view, I would probably let them speak at the festival. If it's not promoting anything illegal or something that stands, you know, in a very blunt way against the values of the United States, I would say that it's part of the debate. That they can play in the same rules that we play when we make something very progressive, liberal, you know, left wing propaganda.
So that's, I mean, I think that's an awesome perspective. Obviously, people are going to be unhappy. Many people are going to be happy with that, right? Because the vast majority of the discussion, is about, like, let's say, progressive social change issues. Is the goal, would the goal of having the NRA there be to kind of like learn from their example, or are we just making a point about inclusiveness? Like, why would we want to listen to what the NRA has to say?
I think that we're still in early stages in my mind. It's like to me there was another event that was very telling this week. There was a game, Endgame Syria,
Uh-huh.
that was done by a group that their mission is to make those games like on a weekly basis around the news. Okay, so they of course they were banned by Apple for the iPhone App Store, and when they looked at the guidelines and when Apple communicated with them, they basically told them, if you want to say something about the culture or religion, write a book. Don't make a video game. That's the opposite of what I'm believing in and I'm thinking. So the reason I think we should be inclusive is because it's so early. and we're still making a point about the medium that I think we need multiple voices, and we need to show that it can be used in different ways by different people and trigger a great debate. Right now the debate of gun control and the NRA versus the people that promote gun control. This debate is happening on the TV and on editorials in
Right.
newspapers and on blogs. I want this debate to happen in video games
Why?
and computer games because I think that this medium is so much more powerful in many ways. It's not going to replace traditional media because traditional media is very good at telling stories and conveying messages and content. But I think that games can show you things and can let you explore in ways that traditional media cannot. And I had this experience with things that I created where people came to us and said, I understood the issue in a much more profound way by playing your game in 5 minutes or an hour than I did by listening to the news for hours, days, weeks.
So do you think then,
And it's because
I mean, do you think that somebody then who makes game experiences like that, do you think they have a greater responsibility then to the people who play them or the world that they're in? I mean, you're describing the techniques or the technology of games for change, gamified systems as being more powerful in a way. So is there some greater responsibility that comes with that?
I think so. I think that it's also a bigger challenge, and I think that that's why we're still struggling, and there are not many great examples, and it's so difficult to do. I think that to make a game for change that is really effective, I mean, you need to design, you need to add sound, you need to add video, you need to add graphics. I mean, you need to control so many disciplines, and on top of it, do something that the player might surprise you in the way that he's engaging with what you've created or she's engaging. So
And that isn't
I think that it's a huge
and
challenge.
that's kind of hard for creators, isn't it? Like one of the central challenges of being a creator of something, even if you're a writer, but also certainly of a game designer, is if the player kind of goes off the rails, you're trying to convince them that genocide is bad, um, and so you expect
Right.
them to play a game in a particular way, and then they kind of go the opposite direction and play it in the wrong way. How do you feel like designers of games for change, and you're a fairly prolific one? How do you feel like you resolve that tension? Do you just have to like talk yourself off a ledge? I mean, what do you do?
I mean, I'm seeing. Let's say that I'm seeing kind of. It's obviously a scale. It's a much more nuanced picture than just black and white. But I do see the scale goes to either games that are very sharp and they're almost editorials, and they really to answer the challenge that you're raising. What they do is almost they put you in a pen, in a place where no matter what choice you'll make, eventually they'll convey the message that they want. The classic September 12th is the most crystallized example, where no matter what you'll do, you'll shoot a terrorist and they'll come up and you'll just create many more terrorists just by the collateral damage and everything you're doing. So this is kind of one kind. The other kind that I actually am more interested in personally, but I think that the organization as a whole would like to see more of, are games that are actually showing you the multiple
Okay.
perspectives. So they're not about, hammering you with like, this is what you need to do, or this is the right answer. I think that games are great in not giving you the right answers, but letting you make your own mind based on a very deep experience and make decisions and see the consequences. So rather than one side of the map making a game about the budget, I would like to see a game that realistically giving you the opportunity to test your own assumptions with the budget.
So, and we're here with Asi Burak, co-president of Games for Change, on the Gamification Revolution. Great to have all of you here. Niels talks about how games are great at letting you play the other role. And that's actually kind of my sort of one question that I have for you about a design pattern that I kind of am curious about. So I played a lot of this game called Civilization, and so in Civilization you have the ability to wage nuclear war against your foes, and it usually comes kind of late in the game. And at that point you've struggled a lot, and you've got relationships, you've at peace with some people who developed all these technologies, and you've often played for hundreds of hours at the point that you get to this moment in the game. And I remember really distinctly, you get to that point, and suddenly you develop nuclear weapon capability. And now you can, from the comfort of your city, blow up your opponents without risking any of your military assets in the game. So of course you do it, right? Now what you find when you do it in the game is that when you try to wage war against another country, so when you try to blow them up, if you're a democracy or republic, the Senate opposes you, and so you have to change to a dictatorship before being able to actually wage the war you want to. When you blow the other
Right.
city up, when you blow the other country up, every country in the world declares war against you, even the ones who have been your allies for many
Right.
years. So the whole world aligns against you. Then you can march into the cities unopposed, but the people who live there, it takes a long time for them to accept you as their legitimate leader. So they oppose you for a long time, and you create massive pollution that takes a really long time to clean up. So it's obvious from these mechanics what Sid Meier thinks about nuclear war. He made his opinion very, very
Right.
clear. What he didn't do, and this is my question for you, what he didn't do was throw up a screen when you try to use the nuclear weapon. It says, hey, wait a minute, nuclear weapons are really bad. If you do this thing,
Right.
all kinds of bad stuff will happen. You don't really want to do this, do you? That would be crazy. He didn't do that at all. He let the character,
Right.
lets the player do it, and then learn the consequences. And what a clear lesson for me. How do we, so how do you accomplish something like that? If we all agree that that's a better method, and that's open for discussion, how do we accomplish something like that when we've got, like, when the money, for example, for a project like that might be coming from an anti-nuclear warfare organization?
Again, I mean, it's we're kind of in a tough territory. I think that it's not necessarily that if they make an editorial game that is very, very sharp and smart, they're not going to succeed. And I don't think that they're going to probably create the game you're speaking about, the civilization, consequences, having this neutral perspective that shows you, yeah, you can do that. Is giving you the tools, but you might be surprised with what happens, and you might understand things that you didn't understand before you took the action. Um, so so I think that there are people that at the end of the day will have to choose kind of the old way of you know giving you a very clear message by, again, I wish they'll do it in a creative way and not with throwing the pop-up that you spoke about. One thing that I see a lot, and I'm sure that you see it as well, when I meet people that are not gamers, or that they don't play games, or they don't necessarily they never designed games, but they want to make a games for change, and I'm sure it's true for gamification, is that they don't understand what you just described uh, in the deep sense. They don't understand that at the end of the day, games are strong at showing you and giving you a lesson through exploration and consequences. Um, what they think that they should do is just like they do in a textbook. They think that they should tell you, and they think that they should tell you with a text, and they should tell you with right and wrong. Um, I think this is something that we should really avoid. But again, the editorial is fine. The editorial could be fun.
But what about that tension? And by the way, if you've got questions, lots of interesting comments popping up in the thread, but if you have questions for Asi or me, just feel free to click the submit a question button and we'll get to them. How do we resolve that tension, like with the actual payers? Like I had a conversation with a zoology institute, a government institution who wanted to make a kind of a game for change around climate change and the loss of species. And so my first reaction, I've kind of started to do this as a litmus test when people want to talk to me about it. I'm like, okay, so what if the best way to make this game to accomplish this idea is that the player gets to destroy all the species on Earth by changing the climate. Instead of trying to save them, their actual objective is to destroy them. So they learn the kind of perspective on it. And the look of shock and horror on her face said volume. And then it took like a half a
Right.
minute, and she said, "I don't think we could get that approved." Now, how do we? I mean,
Right.
so how do you resolve that, or do you even think that we need to resolve that? Does
I
that
mean,
even matter?
yeah, I think that one thing we need to do is be more articulate and it's tough and put more in cases like this, bring with us research and examples. Um, so, for example, one thing that we've done in the past, we spoke about failure. We spoke about the idea that learning, many times, the best learning happens through failure and failing in a safe environment. So there was a series of games around climate change in our community. And what we started seeing is that the students that played this game, in the first 5-10 minutes, what they did was actually melting the planet. So they took the most extreme actions that bring you to the terrible end fast as they could. But there was a lesson there because they tested the boundaries. And again, that's what games are great at doing. And if maybe the person you spoke with could not be convinced, but maybe this is an approach to tell her, look, that's not going to be the way to win the game, but it's something we don't want to forbid players from doing. We made a peace
Yeah.
game, a conflict resolution game, that you could assassinate everybody you want, but the consequences were just very, very tough,
And and
right?
to me,
Just like you
yeah,
described.
yeah. And to me, it seems like a lot of the important learning, right, happens in that moment. So, an interesting question from Andrew, and Asi, you're so, you have such a like obviously incredibly experienced perspective on this. I'm interested in kind of these more ethical questions that are coming up. So I'm interested in this question and what you think about it. So, what about kind of the morality of some of this stuff? Like, is there a moral side? Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about the morality of games as they relate to gun violence. But even in the
Right.
context of making games for change or gamified systems, where we allow people to do things like play with death, do we have an obligation? Does the designer have an obligation to somehow qualify that, or does that feed into some desensitization about life?
I think we must. It's one of those areas that I think we're very weak. When I say we, it's like it's not games for change, it's not gamification, it's the whole space, the whole industry. I think we're very, very weak in being able to connect you in a deep emotional way, doing things that are, making you feel uncomfortable. I'm not saying that there are not good examples, but it's almost like you can write a list of the good examples and put them, in a blog. While in movies, you have it in almost every product. I think that we're not exploring enough. I think we're playing it safe. I think the indie movement is doing much more there, but unfortunately, these are not a big budget in the industry. And again, I mean, because it's interactive, because you make decisions, it's so much more powerful than just watching someone else going through a moral dilemma. And again, instead of telling you what's right and wrong, I wish that the game would show you, and we let you play the wrong path. We let you go in the wrong path and see the consequences. That would be amazing.
That is a great question and a great answer. Thanks for that, Andrew. And so my follow-on question for you, actually, and then I want to talk about some of the cool other stuff that you're doing. My follow-on question for you is, how do we get people to play in the first place? I wonder about the kind of earnestness of a lot of, like games that try to change behavior or games for change. When the headline of the product is, um, what's wrong with genocide, or solving the environmental crisis in the world, or whatever. How do you get people who don't think that that sounds like a lot of fun on a weekend to actually pick this experience
Right.
up in the first place? Wouldn't we be better off making things where the message was less in your face?
I think that, I mean, the more it's a great question, and it's one of the biggest gaps that I see in what we're doing. And again, I think what you're doing is probably a bit suffering from um, the same challenges, even though sometimes corporations might have much bigger budgets. But the idea of getting the games to the hands of people, huge issue. And and I think that what you're mentioning is just one of the reasons it doesn't happen enough. Another reason is that we don't have publishers. We don't have, we're not working with publishers in the commercial industry, and publishing, by your own is a huge challenge. Um, the more I'm seeing things, the more I'm looking at successes and failures. I think that there are two ways. One is be commercial, like work with commercial partners. We're trying to do it now with Zynga and Intel. Just do it big. I mean, work with the people that know how to get to players. And when you do that, you will have to get your message across in a different way. I mean, naturally, when you work with people like that, you won't be able to make your do-goodery game with the do-goodery title. The other way, for those that want to stay very on cause, very explicit and literal, the distribution I think should be completely different. And that means that they should go and do it high touch, interventions that are very, very deep, whether it's non-profits that are working in communities, schools, because the context there, and I always said it, it's like your competition is completely different. You're not competing with commercial games and an amazing experience. You're competing with textbooks. And there, an average game is already
Yeah,
ahead
there's a
of
huge
the
advantage,
curve.
natural advantage. And awesome. And we're talking here on Gamification Revolution with Asi Burak, co-president of Games for Change. And you can come see Asi and me and a bunch of other people at G Summit in April in San Francisco. It's gsummit.com, and there's a cool code you can use down below to save some money on your passes and get a spot in the workshop. And so, Asi, you kind of touched on it, and I want you to tell people a little bit more about, speaking of doing it big, you've been working on this project called
Right.
Half the Sky for some time, which is maybe
Right.
the biggest project in Games for Change ever.
Yeah.
Uh, why don't you tell everyone about
Yeah.
Half the Sky? It's so cool.
So after Sky, and we'll talk about it at the summit, and hopefully by then I could really show positive results from some of the things we're launching. But it started with Nick Christoph. Nicholas Christoph, if you want to say that someone is Mr. Social Good or social change, it's Nicholas Christoph. And is writing in the New York Times, op-ed writer, Pulitzer Prize winner, and just on Twitter, as an example, he has 1,300,000 followers for a reporter. Um, so he came to Games for Change and he said, "Look, guys, I'm doing this. I'm writing this book, which, by the way, since then came out and became #1 bestseller on the New York Times list." And he said, "I'm making this TV series that also came out, and it's a very acclaimed. It's a two-night show on PBS that reached millions of people. Amazing ratings for something so difficult. And the topic is women empowerment and women oppression. And some of the issues are so difficult to watch in this TV show and reading about it in the book." And he said, "Okay, we're doing those amazing things," and that was even before, but I feel like I'm speaking to the same people more or less. Obviously, it's great and we're mobilizing people that care, but we're not reaching people that don't care. And then he came to the idea of making the games. And since then, and I'll be happy to tell you more about it if it's of interest, we actually made 4 games. The fourth, the Facebook game, kind of the big investment, is coming in March, but we also made 3 mobile games for India and Kenya. So it was a very interesting experiment, almost like going in a time machine and developing games for very early mobile devices. And each one of those games needed to be less than 200 kilobytes because you need to download them over the network in a very simple
Right.
device. And we just this week, just to show you that some feedback is already coming and it's very, very satisfying. We made a pregnancy game on the mobile as one of the three, and it's called 9 Minutes. And it's trying to answer a huge problem with pregnancy in India and Kenya, that women are not following what for you in the West might be the most natural and obvious things to do. Not smoking, going to the clinic, delivery at the hospital. And the reason they don't do it is cultural norms, but sometimes, it's objective. It's very expensive to do those things, and they don't think they're important enough. Anyway, 9 minutes, you play the pregnancy cycle in 9 minutes. So every 1 minute is 1 month. And the evaluation report that we got this week from 900 pregnant women with their husbands is really, really powerful. And many of them that had almost no clue about what they need to do during pregnancy, after playing one session with the game, came with so much more knowledge and positive attitudes that, again, it shows you the power, and it's just about making more of those.
So let me ask you a question, because I mean, this is so exciting, right? This is like being able to reach people and changing, starting the process of changing behavior. Does it matter to you that either from this start point, that either it goes from 900 people to 90 million people, right, if we're using the Kenya example, or that we follow up with the women, a year later and see how they actually progress? And I know it's important to you, so I don't mean for that to be like, do you care about it? Because obviously you care about it. The question is, how do we actually make that from a good case study in a small group of people into an actual thing that really changes behavior on a large scale?
Right. So this project specifically is all about scale. Um, so it's almost the brief from Nick Christoph was, I want to reach millions of people. So the evaluation was on 900 people, but the distribution that we're doing is on the most dominant app stores in India and Kenya. So already we have dozens of thousands playing, but we're also in final stages with Disney in India and Safaricom in Kenya to promote the games and really get them to the scale that they deserve. On the Facebook game, same idea. We went to the best in the industry. We went to Zynga, and um, and through those partnerships, we hope to get to. It's almost like we found our publishers. So obviously they never did it before. So for them, it's a learning curve. How to think about it, how to leverage it in the press, because this is obviously what's important for someone like that is involved. But this is the way to get to millions of people. I can't expect them to download it. And one more thing I want to mention is the idea that, and to me, this is the only way to reach scale, is that we release this version, it must be just the first version. So now we're already in a process of phase two, because if you think about it, if you look at the commercial industry, the big successes are about Call of Duty 1, Call of Duty 2, Call of Duty 3. It's not because they're lazy, or at least not only because they're lazy, because they built an engine and they improve it every time. And this is what I think we should do more in Games for Change. If we did those three games and it's the first version, let's see how people play them. Let's see what works, let's see what doesn't. Let's see what distribution channels work. Let's scale them up. Let's continue to invest money in the project. Let's figure out how we make some revenue. Let's figure out from the Facebook game how we make it sustainable. Tough
Yeah.
questions, but this is the way to go.
How, and so one last question for you, because we're, sort of almost out of time. If there's one, if there's one thing that you could ask from the games industry, who, dipping their toes in the water with you a little bit, but not embracing making games for change all the time. And I have my own thesis about why that is, having to do with some deep-seated libertarianism. What's the one thing that you think would really help advance this movement forward? What do we need more than anything else from games?
I think that what Zynga was doing with us is very interesting. So Zynga has a new head for Zynga.org called Ken Weber, and Ken also joined our board recently, which is a great thing to have someone like that from the commercial industry. But the idea that he brought in, I think, could be replicated. he started this thing he calls Studio G, okay? Studio for Good. And what he did, he doesn't have like full-time employees, that left everything they do at Zynga and start to make games for change. But they invest some of their time and they do some in-kind advising, evaluating. This is what I think the game companies should do. If you think about it, they have social responsibility. All of them are contributing to society, but they do it with no connection to games. If they could get their employees, that many of them are bored, many of them want to do something for good, many of them are tired of doing the same thing, get this talent to help you, to help us, to help making games that are looking differently,
So a
you
little bit
know?
of
And
support from the using the talent and using the resources, a little bit of support from the awesome creative well that's Gabe's, and probably from the corporations so engaged in gamification also would be useful. And to that end, we're out of time for today. But I want to thank Asi Burak and Games for Change, and be sure to check out Half the Sky. You can follow Games for Change on Twitter at G4C, which is the number four in between, really easy to follow. And you can come see Asi and me and a bunch of other great folks at G Summit in April. On behalf of everyone, thanks for watching the Gamification Revolution. Keep having fun.
thank you very much, Gabe.